All right. We are getting started on lesson 2, and we're going to be trying to answer the question, how did Spanish exploration change the lives of people in the Americas? Okay, that's the guiding question for this lesson. And let's go ahead and dive into reading. We're doing the Columbian Exchange. When Columbus made contact with the Taino people in 1492, he began what is now called the Columbian Exchange. The term refers to the trading of items, animals, culture, ideas, and more between Europeans and native peoples of the Americas. The Spanish brought back from the Americas plants, animals, and other products unknown in Europe. These included corn, peanuts, tomatoes, potatoes, pineapples, turkeys, tobacco, and most types of beans. Farmers in Europe began to grow some of these plants, which meant that fewer people starved. Also, many of the new foods contained vitamins that made European diets healthier. As a result, the population of Europe grew. So now we're over on the next page. The Spanish also brought new products to the Americas. These included wheat, oranges, peaches, bananas, cattle, goats, sheep, pigs, and horses. Many of these items changed the way of life for native peoples of the Americas. Horses, for example, changed the way in which Native Americans hunted buffalo on the Great Plains. All right, so now that we've been introduced to this Columbian Exchange, I want you to pause the video and talk with your group or talk with your partner. What are some things that the Spanish brought back from the Americas? And then what are some things that the Spanish brought to the Americas, right? So what did they bring to America, and what did they take from America back to Europe? Go ahead and pause the video and talk about this with your partners. So we're moving on to the next page. We're on page 84. And let's go ahead and get started. The Columbian Exchange did not involve just Europe and the Americas. It transformed the whole planet. Some of the plants Europeans brought to the Americas originally came from Asia and Africa. Many plants from the Americas traveled around the world as well. Chili peppers, for instance, were brought to Asia by European sailors and became popular ingredients in many Asian dishes. The Spanish introduced sugar to the Americas. Sugarcane, which originated in Southeast Asia, was a precious commodity in Europe because it grows only in warm, rainy climates. Brazil and islands in the Caribbean proved to be ideal for growing the crop. The demand for sugar would make it one of the most valuable crops known in the Americas. Not all things traded in the Columbian Exchange were useful. The Europeans also brought diseases such as smallpox and measles to the Americas. Because these diseases were new to the natives, they had not developed any resistance to them. As a result, they died in very large numbers. The Spanish also forced many natives to work as enslaved persons and even shipped some back to Spain on voyages during which many died. By 1550, few Taínos survived. Enslaved Africans were brought to the islands to replace them. This forced relocation of peoples was also a part of the Columbian Exchange. So let's stop and talk right there. Let's talk with our partners. What positive effects did the Columbian Exchange have on people native to the Americas? And what negative effects did the Columbian Exchange have on them and on others? I want you to talk about what we just read. You can go back and look at the answers are all up here on this page for the most part. What were the positive effects? And what were some of the negative effects? Go ahead and turn and talk with your partners. All right, let's go ahead and move on. We're going to be talking about now the Spanish exploration and conquest in the Americas. So let's start off up here. By 1515, Spain had spread its control to several islands in the Caribbean Sea. Spain's conquests gave them land to settle and people to enslave, but they did not bring the riches the Spanish sought. Sometimes they saw bits of gold in the hands of the island natives. The Spanish wondered, where did this gold come from? Juan Ponce de Leon was a Spanish explorer who came to the Americas on Columbus's second voyage. Later, he was governor of the island that would come to be known as Puerto Rico. In 1513, Ponce de Leon landed in what is now the state of Florida. He called the area La Florida, Spanish for full of flowers, and claimed it for Spain. He was looking for gold, although legend says that he was also seeking a fountain of youth, a place where magical waters could restore one's youth. But Ponce de Leon found no gold in Florida and no fountain of youth either. When he returned there in 1521 to establish a Spanish settlement, he was wounded in fighting with the Calusa people of the area. He traveled to Cuba and died there of his wounds. Hernan Cortez, another Spanish explorer, was more successful in his search for riches. In fact, he is called a conquistador, Spanish for conqueror. Like Ponce de Leon, Cortez was very interested in finding gold. Having heard stories from the native people, he decided there must be a great empire rich in gold to the west of the Caribbean islands. He was right. All right. An empire is a large area in which different groups are controlled by one ruler. Since the 1430s, the Aztec Empire had ruled over several native groups in what is now central Mexico. The Aztecs built a magnificent capital, Tenochtitlan, where more than 300,000 people lived. In 1502, Moctezuma II became the emperor, or ruler of the empire. However, many native peoples under his rule had started to rebel against the Aztecs. In 1519, Hernan Cortez left Cuba seeking the great riches he had heard about. After landing in what is today the coastal city of Veracruz, Mexico, he and his soldiers moved inland. When he arrived at Tenochtitlan, Moctezuma met with him. He offered Cortez gifts of gold and precious jewels. These were not enough for Cortez, however. He took Montezuma prisoner, causing a riot in which the emperor was killed. We're moving on to the next page. The Aztecs then drove Cortez and his troops from the city. They battled on the plains of Otumba, where Cortez and his troops killed the Aztec commander. The Spanish then retreated to a friendlier area. A few months later, Cortez returned with a larger force to fight the Aztecs. Along the way, his army was joined by a number of native fighters unhappy with Aztec rule. This help from native allies was just one reason the Spanish were able to defeat the Aztecs. The Spanish soldiers also had two things that the Aztecs did not: fine swords and horses. These gave the Spanish a clear fighting advantage. In fact, even when outnumbered, forces with swords and lances fighting on horseback usually won the day. After 75 days of battle, Cortez and his army destroyed the Aztec capital. On its ruins, the Spanish built Mexico City. It would be the capital of a colony the Spanish called Nueva España, or New Spain. So on the next page, we're looking at up top. In 1531, Francisco Pizarro, another Spanish conquistador, sailed to the west coast of South America with a small army. Like Cortez, he was following rumors he had heard of an empire rich in treasures. From the coast, he traveled with his troops to the mighty Inca Empire high in the Andes Mountains. The Incas ruled an empire of 12 million people. Because they lived in thick stone cities high in the mountains, they did not fear the Spanish attack. The Spanish, however, had new weapons the Incas had never seen. Gunpowder had come to Europe from China centuries before. The troops Pizarro brought with him were armed with a type of gun called the arquebus. Incan weapons were no match for this. So here's a picture of a guy using a arquebus. It's kind of like an old musket, except they had a little stand that they would put it on to help them hold it. It was a early type of gun, and it gave them a very big advantage against the Incans, who had no technology like that. So let's see. Now we see down here the stone-walled cities high up in the mountains. They would have thought they would be fine. One, having stone walls helps keep people out, but also putting things up high in the mountains helps give you an advantage when you're higher from a military perspective. But once again, with the technology that the Spanish were bringing, they didn't have much of a chance to fight them off. And let's continue. Pizarro's army captured Atahualpa, the Inca emperor, and killed 1,500 of his followers. When Atahualpa offered a room full of gold in return for his freedom, Pizarro agreed. From all over the empire, valuable gold objects poured in. Yet after the treasure was delivered, Pizarro had Atahualpa killed anyway. In 1533, the Spanish completed their conquest of the Inca Empire by capturing its capital of Cuzco. So they're so greedy for gold that they captured the emperor, and when the emperor gave him what he promised he'd bring, he killed him anyways. Pretty crazy, right? So we see a map over here showing us where the different empires that we've been talking about. So the Aztec Empire is up here, and then the Inca Empire is down here. They're on the west side of South America. Very cool. So big empires, and there were lots of people in these places. There are millions of people that these empires ruled over, right? So it wasn't just a few people. There was a lot of people already here when the Spanish came. So let's talk. What seems to have been the strongest motive or reason for Spanish exploration and conquest? What advantages did the Spanish have to help them conquer the Aztecs and Incas? So go ahead and pause the video and talk with your partners. When you have an answer, we'll go ahead and move on. Moving on to the section now called New Spain Expands. And let's zoom in real quick. By 1525, the Spanish territory of New Spain included most of present-day Mexico and Central America. Despite its size, Spanish explorers and conquistadors continued looking for rich, new lands for Spain to control. In 1528, Álvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca and Estevanico were exploring the coast along the Gulf of Mexico. They were shipwrecked by a hurricane and landed in what is now Texas. There, the two explorers and their crew lived among Native Americans for 4 years. Eventually, they left on foot. They walked through parts of what are now New Mexico and Arizona to return to Mexico. The crew's experiences made them sympathetic to Native Americans, and de Vaca urged the King of Spain to treat them better. Hunting for riches, Hernando de Soto began an expedition in 1538 through what is now the southeastern United States. De Soto found no riches, but he and his group did become the first Europeans to see the Mississippi River. Then, in 1542, De Soto became ill and died not far from the river. In 1540, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, having heard tales of 7 cities of gold, went searching to find them. He discovered no such cities. He and his group did, however, become the first Europeans to see the Grand Canyon. They also claimed for Spain large areas of what is now the American Southwest, land that was already inhabited by Native American groups. Right, so they just showed up from Spain and they said, "We own this place. This is ours." Pretty interesting way to do business, right? And so we'll look at that map in just a second. Let's go ahead and read about Cabrillo. Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo made one of the first Spanish claims on what is now California. He explored the coast around present-day San Diego in 1542. 60 years later, Sebastian Vizcaíno sailed up the California coast, giving many places the Spanish names we still use today. Spain also continued to pursue its claims in what is now Florida. After several failed attempts at a settlement there, Pedro Menendez de Aviles in 1565 built a fort in an area on the east coast that he named St. Augustine. St. Augustine is still there. It's still a city. It's an old, very, very old city. So up here we see our map, routes of Spanish explorers, and we can see the different places that they explored and when they explored there. Very interesting stuff. So let's talk. Which sections of what is now the United States did the Spanish explore? How often did they find what they were looking for? Give examples to explain your answer. We'll go ahead and pause, and I'll let you turn and talk with your partner.